The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time is one of the most critically acclaimed games of all time. It is a fan favorite across multiple generations. Whether you played it on the original N64 or the remake on the 3DS, this game's influence cannot be denied. Despite this, and it might sound crazy, I've never actually gone through the entirety of Ocarina of Time before, even though I consider myself a die-hard Nintendo fan. So today, I will be going through the entire game and seeing for myself if the N64 version of Ocarina of Time is actually good. The game begins with a scene of a boy in green being attacked by a man on a horse. We then see a sentient tree asking the fairy Navi to find a young boy in Kokiri village who apparently needs to start his journey to save Hyrule. Navi makes it to our house and wakes us up. We play as Link, who is a boy without a fairy in a village where all the residents have one. Navi tells us we need to go visit the Great Deku Tree, but first we have to get a sword and a shield so we don't get hurt outside the village. When we make it to the tree, he tells us that he's essentially cursed and needs us to go inside of him and defeat whatever is plaguing him. This acts as the first dungeon of the game and is quite helpful in introducing all of the main concepts of Zelda. There are a few different kinds of enemies that each require different ways of defeating them. Certain puzzles require you to use items in specific ways to get past them. You're also introduced to the main collectible of the game, Golden Skulltulas. At the end of the dungeon, you face a boss which is not very difficult but still challenging enough that you aren't just spamming it with attacks. After we defeat the boss, the Great Deku Tree informs us that he is too far gone and will unfortunately pass away. But before he does, he tells us some of Hyrule's history. Apparently, before life as they know it existed, three goddesses named Din, Nehru, and Furore bestowed life and prosperity to the land of Hyrule. When their jobs were completed, they left behind three golden triangles that formed the Triforce. This is the land's sacred item with the power to grant any wish and is held within the sacred realm. With this knowledge, we're able to continue our journey and try and learn more about where to go next. Before we leave for Hyrule Castle though, we see our friend Saria at the exit of the forest. She gives us a special ocarina, and with that, we head into Hyrule Field, a massive hub area which is quite impressive considering the time when the game came out. After a long walk and a rough night of fighting monsters, we enter Hyrule Castle Town. This place is a bustling town full of people who all seem to be having a fun time. There's a lot of people to talk to and even some shops to visit, but once we get that out the way, we're able to go towards the castle. Apparently, this girl named Marin's father went to the castle to deliver some milk, but he hasn't come back yet. She thinks that he probably fell asleep and gives us something to wake him up. We can't just go straight to the castle though due to the high security around it, so we sneak around and find Marin's father. Eventually, we wake him up and go further into the castle courtyard until we make it to Princess Zelda. She immediately recognizes us and explains that this is because she had a dream where darkness covered Hyrule. But then, a beam of light emerged from Kokiri Forest which ended up being a boy dressed in green. She then explains some more information about the three goddesses in the Triforce until she tells us to look at the man behind a window. This is Ganondorf, who is the leader of the Gerudo, who Zelda is very suspicious about. More importantly though, Zelda tells us to collect the three spiritual stones and bring them to the Temple of Time in order to prevent the Triforce from being taken by evil forces. Before we leave, Zelda's bodyguard Impa teaches us a song called Zelda's Lullaby and then tells us to head to Kakariko Village so we can go to Death Mountain. Before that though, we visit Lon Lon Ranch and see Marin and her father again. Then, we go back to Kokiri Forest to catch up with Saria. Apparently she went into the Lost Woods once we left, so we go in to find her. Once we meet her, she teaches us her favorite song. Throughout the game, these songs we learn will be quite important for both story and gameplay reasons. We're pretty much done here though, so we go back to Hyrule Field and into Kakariko Village. This is a pretty normal town all around, but there seems to be a couple dark secrets within. In one house in particular, there is a family which has been changed into Skulltulas, and the only way to turn them back is by collecting all of the Golden Skulltula collectibles. Also in Kakariko, there is a graveyard with a hidden tomb underneath. If we venture through this place, we can learn a song that lets us control the time of day whenever we want. That's pretty much all we need to do here though, so we try to move on and show the guard to Death Mountain a letter Zelda gave us. Heading into Death Mountain, a Goron tells us what's going on. The Goron people are currently experiencing a famine due to their food source being cut off by presumably Ganondorf. Anyway, we try to speak to the leader of the Gorons, Darunia, and he tells us how angry he is about the famine. In order to calm him down, we play him Saria's song, and he asks us to help him clear out the enemies from Dodongo's cavern so they can eat again. He also gives us the Goron's bracelet, which lets us pick up bomb flowers. Using these bombs, we can blow up the entrance to Dodongo's cavern and head into the second dungeon. This dungeon involves involves heavy use of the bomb flowers to solve puzzles. We even get a bomb bag so we can carry them on our person. Truthfully, there isn't much complicated about this place though, so we make it to the end and fight King Dodongo. This fight isn't that hard since we can throw bombs into its mouth to defeat it after a while. After the fight, Darunia declares we are now sworn brothers and gives us the second spiritual stone. Before we leave though, we head to the summit of Death Mountain and go inside the Great Fairy Fountain. The fairy grants us the ability to use magic. Now that we have 2 spiritual stones, we can go find the last one in Zora's domain. We play Zelda's Lullaby in front of a waterfall that reveals the entrance to the domain. This place is super relaxing, but there seems to be a bit of a problem with the Zoras. We speak to the king, but he is too busy being worried about his missing daughter, Princess Ruto. In the meantime, we play a diving game and get an item that gives us better swimming abilities. Using this, we go to Lake Hylia and learn that the princess of the Zoras is trapped inside of their guardian god, Lord Jabu Jabu. We speak to the king and he lets us go past him to find her, eventually. Lord Jabu Jabu is here, but we can't enter yet. So, using a fish in a bottle, we get him to open up. Inside Jabu Jabu's belly, we eventually find Princess Ruto, but she seems to be reluctant to leave quite yet. She's acting like this because Jabu Jabu has been acting strange recently, and she also lost her precious stone here. She asks us to carry her through the dungeon, and we go through several rooms with enemies and puzzles. In one room in particular, we get a new item being the boomerang. At one point we fight a mini-boss and get separated from Ruto. After a few more rooms, we find the boss Baronade. We fight this thing using the boomerang primarily. It's definitely the most interesting out of all the boss fights so far, but it's still not that hard to fight. We find Ruto after the fight and leave Jabu Jabu. In return for our help, Ruto gives us the spiritual stone, but only under the condition that we become her fiancé, since her mother said that that was the only reason she could give the stone away. We don't really care about that though, and we just need the stone, so we agree and leave Zora's domain. On our way back to Hyrule Castle Town, we see the sky darken and a horse carrying Impa and Zelda emerges. Ganondorf shortly follows and asks us where Zelda went. After not answering, he knocks us down with magic and we're left confused. Zelda left behind the Ocarina of Time with a message on it. She tells us Ganondorf was trying to get this ocarina and she teaches us the Song of Time, which we need to open up the door of time. After entering Castle Town and into the Temple of Time, we play the Song of Time and the spiritual stones take their place. Inside the door we see the Master Sword, but no sign of the Triforce. We go to pull the Master Sword, but then the screen goes white until Ganondorf appears. He tells us that he tricked us and used our collection of the stones to sneak into the sacred realm. We wake up in the Chamber of Sages and the Sage of Light Rauru informs us that time itself has passed on and we have become an adult. When we're sent out the chamber, we're met with someone named Sheik who tells us we need to go to 5 different temples to awaken the other sages, starting with the Forest Temple. He also tells us that we need to collect an item in Kakariko Village before we begin this section of our journey. Back in the Temple of Time, we're greeted with some absolutely terrifying sights. Castle Town has been completely obliterated, so we go to check on Lon Lon Ranch. In the years, Marin's father has been kicked out the ranch by his evil business partner Ingo. We're challenged to a horse race by Ingo, who is a cheating sore loser, but we still beat him using the horse Epona, who he promised us that we could keep if we won. Of course, he didn't keep his end of the bargain, so we ended up just jumping over the wall and back into Hyrule Field. We head into Kakariko Village and into the graveyard. Inside one of the gravestones, the ghost of the former Undertaker Dompe challenges us to a race. If we win, he gives us the hookshot item, another necessary item to progress. Back in Kakariko, a man inside the windmill is very angry because years ago a boy played an ocarina and made the windmill go crazy. We never did that though, so it couldn't have been us. Regardless, he teaches us the song that the boy played back then. Now, we could go back to Kokiri Forest and into the Lost Woods. After getting past some massive enemies, we reached the Forest Temple using the hookshot. Also, when we got here, Sheik arrived and gave us a song that would allow us to teleport back to the temple whenever we wanted. This is where the game truly begins in my opinion. Prior to this, the dungeons and enemies have been quite weak. The puzzles themselves are never even that confusing either. But now, we're greeted by 2 strong enemies attacking us at once. When we go inside, it's clear things are different. The music is eerie and ominous, and almost every single room has difficult aspects. Visually, this place is amazing, but I have anything but fond memories about this dungeon. In one room, we find the fairy bow, which helps us complete the puzzles. The main objective of this dungeon is to destroy 4 ghosts until we find the final one in the center area. After beating it, we're faced with a surprisingly complicated puzzle. Using the boss key we found along the way, we enter the boss room. There is literally no one here until we try to leave. Ganondorf suddenly appears, except it's actually a copycat called Phantom Ganon. This fight is super cool because Ganon goes into the painting surrounding the room, requiring us to make split-second decisions to hit him. After this segment, we fight Phantom Ganon using his own attacks against him. We defeat it and hear the real Ganon talk to us. He sends the Phantom Ganon to the Shadow Realm and we are brought to the Chamber of sages again. We see Saria here and she reveals that she is the forest sage and she gives us her medallion. Back in Kokiri Forest, we see that defeating Phantom Ganon allowed the new sprout of the Great Deku Tree to emerge. It tells us that we are not actually a member of the Kokiri and that we're a Hylian. Apparently, our mother had entrusted us to the Kokiri many years ago before she passed away. This news might not seem like much, but if you think about the implications of this, it makes Link seem really lonely. He lost his childhood friend to her duties as a sage, lost his childhood innocence to his own duties, and now learns that his race isn't even what he thought. This aside, our next destination is Death Mountain, which is clearly not in great shape. Back in Goron City, there isn't a soul here except for one Goron. When we talk to him, we learn that his name is also Link and that he is Darunia's son, who named him after us. Moreover, a dragon has taken over Death Mountain and has caused the dreadful appearance of the place. Darunia is also not here, because he is trying to handle the situation. Death Mountain is unfortunately too hot for us to survive here, but Link, the Goron, gave us a red tunic that allows us to withstand the heat. Inside the mountain, Sheik greets us and plays us a song that allows us to teleport here. Inside the fire temple, we need to save the Gorons and defeat the dragon. We meet Darunia, who recognizes us, and he tells us that he is going to go on ahead to challenge the dragon. Throughout the dungeon, we free Gorons by solving puzzles and defeating enemies. There is a mini-boss here which has a really cool design called the Flare Dancer. Beyond this, we can get an item called the Megaton Hammer, which Darunia briefly mentioned earlier. This item can be used to solve further puzzles and release the final Gorons. After getting the boss key, we enter the room and suddenly the dragon Volvagia emerges. This boss is certainly one of the harder fights we've had so far. This thing does a ton of damage, but we need to defeat it using the Megaton Hammer. Volvagia's attacks are quite difficult to evade, because not only do you have to worry about the actual attacks, but also these lava pits. After this long fought battle, we save Death Mountain and go to the Chamber of Sages once more to see the Sage of Fire, Darunia. He thanks us and gives us his fire medallion. Our next destination is Zora's Domain, but as we approach it, it seems to be snowing. By the time we enter, the entirety of this place has been frozen over, including the king. We eventually find a sub-dungeon called the Ice Cavern. Deep inside, we find a blue flame that we capture inside of a bottle. In the last room, we encounter Sheik again, and he tells us that there is a monster in the water temple who froze Zora's Domain. He teaches us a song so we can go into the water temple. Also, we get an item called the Iron Boots, which are very important to this dungeon. Back in Zora's Domain, we unfreeze the king, who gives us the blue tunic that gives us the ability to breathe underwater. Using the song Sheik taught us, we warp to Lake Hylia, which is more like a crater now, and using the Iron Boots, we find our way into the water temple. Before going into this, I was kind of aware about how bad this dungeon is. Honestly though, I wasn't expecting it to be this bad. The issue with the water temple is the shocking drop in pace here. Games forcing you to slow down isn't always bad, but the execution of it here is just wrong. In order to navigate this place, you need to equip and unequip the Iron Boots. The problem is that these are not able to be bound to the C-stick, not to mention the inherent slow nature of water levels in games. Anyway, a little ways through the dungeon, we meet Ruto, who explains the dungeon mechanics to us. We also face Dark Link in a duel, which rewards us with the long shot, an upgraded version of the hook shot. After making it through this dreaded dungeon, the boss Morpha is equally annoying. It's sort of a tentacle monster that can grab us if we aren't paying attention. Using the long shot we got, we can take it down and arrive in the Chamber of Sages once again. Here, Ruto greets us as the Sage of Water, and she gives us the Water Medallion. Our next destination is Kakariko Village, but when we return, it's on fire. Sheik is here, but he is attacked by a strange force. We get knocked down, and when we wake up, we learn that an evil spirit has awakened from the well in the town. We can't actually go inside it right now though, and Sheik tells us that we have to go back in time. We warp back to the past and go into the well. Unfortunately, it's filled with water and we can't use the Iron Boots as a child. If we go into the windmill though and play the Song of Storms, it will drain the water from the well. And well, I guess this is the moment that the musician in the windmill was angry about in the future. Kind of a crazy paradox actually. Inside the bottom of the well, there's not much to do here. At one point, there's a mini-boss called the Dead Hand, which is notoriously one of the creepiest bosses in gaming. Defeating it gives the Lens of Truth to us, an item that allows us to see through invisible walls and other hidden things. That's literally all we need to get here though, and we go back to the Temple of Time to become an adult again. Playing the song Sheik gave us prior, we teleport to the Shadow Temple. Using a magic spell called Din's Fire, we light the torches around us to enter it. Inside the Shadow Temple is very eerie with music that is haunting. The main mechanic of this dungeon is using the Lens of Truth to solve puzzles. After defeating another Dead Hand, we get the Hover Boots, which lets us get around certain areas easier. The entire dungeon is themed around death, and it definitely is one of the creepier parts of the game. I'll definitely say though, a lot less annoying than the water temple. After we go through all the dungeon, we find the boss room. Out of nowhere, hands appear and they start smacking the ground. This is Bongo Bongo, and it is the creature that attacked us in Kakariko. This boss is certainly quite difficult if you don't know what you're doing. Using a combination of the Lens of Truth and the bow, we're able to whittle him down and defeat him. Entering the Chamber of Sages once more, we meet Impa, who is the Sage of Shadow. She gives us the Shadow Medallion and then we leave. Our next destination is the Gerudo Desert, somewhere we have not been yet. Using Epona, we jump over the bridge, which is out, and we meet a carpenter from Kakariko Village. Apparently, over the last 7 years, his people decide to become thieves and join the Gerudo. The boss isn't really sure what happened to them though, so we're gonna keep an eye out for them. When we enter Gerudo Fortress, we learn that they are primarily a female society that does not tolerate any other men besides Ganondorf. After sneaking around the guard, we find a carpenter locked up in a prison cell. A Gerudo guard attacks us and we defeat her to get the key to free the carpenter. We do this again to save the other one, and the guard actually gives us a Gerudo membership out of respect. This allows us to navigate the area without being antagonized by the Gerudo. We make our way into Gerudo Desert and have to follow these pillars to find the Desert Colossus. Inside, we literally can't do anything here. We learn from the inscriptions on the wall and Sheik that we have to come back here as a child to enter it. Going back to the Temple of Time, we become a child and then go back to the temple. Here, we see a woman named Naburu guarding the dungeon. She asks us to go into this tiny hole and into the dungeon. This place is absolutely beautiful, and it has extreme Middle Eastern influence. The dungeon has strong enemies, and by the end of this part, we get these silver gauntlets which Naburu wanted us to find. Before we get to bring it to her though, 2 witches kidnap Naburu and run away. Left with nothing else to do here, we go back to the temple as an adult and use the silver gauntlets to open up the real dungeon. Inside, we get another key item called the Mirror Shield. It's pretty much just like our normal shield, but we can use it to solve light-related puzzles. Further in the dungeon, we see the 2 witches creating an enemy for us to fight. When we defeat it, the armor falls off and reveals that it was Noboru inside. The witches come back and send her away once more, and we progress into the boss room. The Sorceress Sisters Twinrova appear, and we have to actually think a little bit to defeat them. We need to use our Mirror Shield to reflect their attacks to the correct sister. After this segment, the 2 sisters fuse into the real form of Twinrova. This is a similar segment, but different enough to challenge us. After unleashing the Master Sword on her, we defeat Twinrova and enter the Chamber of Sages. Noboru explains that she became the Sage of Spirit and gives us her Spirit Medallion. After warping out, Roru contacts us and tells us to go to the Temple of Time. Sheik is here and tells us specifically what happened when we became an adult the first time. When Ganondorf stole the Triforce, he was not worthy to use it. So, the Triforce split off into 3 segments, being Power, Courage, and Wisdom. Ganondorf got the Triforce of Power, Link got the Triforce of Courage, and Sheik reveals that he got the Triforce of Wisdom. Well, Sheik is not actually a boy and reveals herself to be Princess Zelda. She also says that she is the 7th sage who is destined to lead the other sages. She gives us the light arrows, but suddenly Ganondorf identifies Zelda's location and kidnaps her. He tells us to come to his castle and face him. Leaving the Temple of Time, we reach Ganondorf's castle, which has been completely remade. The sages construct a bridge of light for us to go inside. The main pillar of the castle is blocked off by a force, so we have to go through several rooms and shoot something with a light arrow at the end of each of them. Along the way here, we get an upgrade to our gauntlets, turning them golden, allowing us to lift much heavier objects. We also find another fairy fountain here that upgrades our hearts. After completing all these segments and getting the boss key, we make it up a massive staircase and see Ganondorf playing at the organ. He curses us, preventing us from using Z targeting, and then challenges us to battle. This fight is quite similar to Phantom Ganon's second phase, and we deflect his attacks to make him vulnerable. Using the light arrows and the Master Sword, we are able to take him down. He screams out and the castle starts to collapse. We run out of the castle as fast as we can with Zelda, dodging falling rocks and enemies. Making it out just in time, Ganondorf re-emerges and turns into his final form, Ganon. His attacks deal a ridiculous amount of damage, and worst of all, we get our Master Sword hit out of our hands. Using our light arrows and other items, we can still hurt him though. We're able to stun him and reclaim our Master Sword in the downtime. We stun him again, and Zelda restricts him using her magic power. We take this opportunity to pierce Ganon with the Master Sword, and she calls upon the sages to seal Ganon away for an indefinite amount of time. Zelda says her goodbyes to us, and we're sent back to our own time to actually live out our childhood. As great as it is that we defeated Ganon, we can't change what already has happened. We might be a child now, but at this point our mind is one of an adult. The sages aren't able to be around anymore due to their duties. Overall, it's a bittersweet ending. And with that, the game is over. So what did I think about the Ocarina of Time? Well, I can definitely see how people consider it to be the greatest game of all time. Just being honest, I don't necessarily agree with this take, but all things considered, it is a valid opinion. If you played this during the era which it was released, there was quite literally nothing like it at the time. A game this long, yet also so detailed, had not broken into the mainstream yet, and Ocarina of Time was the first to do it so well. Many mechanics that the game introduced, such as Z-targeting, became staples of 3D gaming to this day. Obviously though, there are problems with this game, and it can feel a bit drawn out in terms of having repetitive gameplay. Many side characters are also barely even fleshed out, and Navi in general is just annoying. Some people like to complain about the difficulty, but it's not really that bad. There are certainly jumps in gameplay where things get harder, but I don't really have a problem with this. Truth be told, I wonder how much that Ocarina of Time 3D fixed my few issues with the game, because I've heard really great things about the remake. I guess the main thing I'm left with after this is that I don't really see myself replaying the game all that often. At least not without mods or other fun challenges. It's just kind of slow, honestly. Regardless, is The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time actually good? Yes. I just wonder how the game that follows it, Majora's Mask, will compare.